We lived over a grocery store, and my father said that that was good because we were close to the food, but we were also close to the cockroaches. So my job when I came home at night was to throw the lights on in the kitchen and burst in and kill as many cockroaches as I could before I went to bed. So we were poor, I suppose you'd call it. My father was there because the rent was extremely cheap. But it was about a block away from public school and junior high school, which was very nice. Nevertheless, it was a nice community, and so it was easy enough to grow up there, even though we sort of lacked for some obvious things. My father fixed TVs, and the thing that did him in was the move to color, because when they went to semiconductors and got rid of tubes, vacuum tubes, that more or less killed his ability to repair a television. So I had a choice. I could have worked for IBM. So I did work for IBM in Paris one summer, and then I worked for IBM in Poughkeepsie for 2 summers. So there was a decision point where one had to decide whether one was going to go into industry or go into academia. And so I opted for academia, sort of in my 3rd year of graduate school. So I did my graduate work at the University of Wisconsin and actually ended up in one of the earliest computer science departments and probably had a fairly early Ph.D. So my Ph.D. was in '69. There were a few schools that preceded Wisconsin. I think Carnegie Mellon had one of the very, very earliest ones. But some of our faculty had newly minted Ph.D.s in computer science. So it was still pretty rare to get a Ph.D. in computer science back in '69. Madison was a very strong center of student revolts, primarily to the Vietnam War. So, but that was primarily at the undergraduate level. So it was a little odd. I was working on my Ph.D. at the time, so I was a more serious student, you might say, than the students who were undergraduates who were out there on the barricades demonstrating. So we had the Vietnam War demonstrations. Then at the same time, the teaching assistants formed a union. And so all of the TAs, including myself, went out on strike for the first time. I had my TAA on strike posters for a long time, and then somehow in a move they got lost. But yeah, there was a lot of distractions, you might say. So it was actually kind of amazing. I ended up getting my degree despite all the distractions. And of course, I met my wife there. She was doing her Ph.D. in history at the same time. So in fact, she got her degree about 6 months after. So I had already gotten my degree, so I actually walked her through the graduation ceremonies, which was kind of nice. But yeah, Madison was definitely a hotbed of revolutionary thought. When Marianne and I both got our PhDs, she's got a PhD in Renaissance history. And the job market in Renaissance history is very meager. So she had no job offers. And I got this job offer at Cornell. So she came with me, we went to Cornell. And while we were there, she ended up doing research while she looked for a post. And after about 3 years of searching, she found a post at Occidental College here in Los Angeles. So it seemed like a good thing to follow her. So I did. So I came out, I interviewed, and I got the job at SC. So this is what's called a classic two-body problem. We're encountering this more and more every day. People who are interviewing for jobs have spouses that are sort of equally searching for careers. And LA is a great place for that because it's a big city and there are lots of opportunities. It's a multi-ethnic, multi-racial society, very different than the States back in the East. And so California is a comfortable place, and the diversity is very high in California. I think it's one of the really appealing things. Well, we ended up living right across from Occidental College, which is located in Eagle Rock, which is like a lower middle class area. So there were a lot of little cottages that you could live in, and we rented a house from the college. The rent was $115 a month for a 3-bedroom, 2-bath with a backyard. so we can kind of scratch our head over how much things have changed over the years. And so we lived near the campus for probably about 6 years. It was really extremely nice. But then we started having children, and so schools became a bigger issue. In the 70s, there were two big crises that happened in the 70s to everybody. One was there was a gas crisis, and the price of gas was going up. Nothing compared to our $6 prices today, but there was a limited supply, the price was going up, and the second thing was there was busing. And kids were being bused all over the city, and so we made a decision we probably would want to find a place where the kids could go locally to school. And that's why we actually moved out of the Eagle Rock area. We decided we would move to Beverly Hills. So we got a house in Beverly Hills. That was our solution. Good schools, and sort of we could live near the schools so the kids could walk. The Rand Corporation had the Pentagon Papers. I think I told you this. It's a good story. And Ellsberg, of course, gave the papers out, and the Washington Post published them, and the New York Times came in, and there's a great movie about it. But Congress was upset, or at least a lot of people were upset at that, and they pulled the funding from Rand. That was part of their punishment for Rand. And so computer science lost its funding. So there was a group of people at Rand, as I understand the story, that basically lost all their funding, and they needed to get out of Rand. And actually Barry Boehm, who's on our faculty, was one of those people, and he went off to TRW. But Keith Unkefer was the head of, I believe, the computer science group at Rand, and he had good connections in Washington and felt he could raise the money to establish a center. But he needed a nonprofit to be associated with. And so he went around looking, and I gather they did look at UCLA, but UCLA, as I've got the story, had too much red tape involved, whereas when they went to SC more or less through Caprillion, who was sort of the guy who ran the place, just simply said, yeah, we'll be happy to have you. And so that's how things got started. They found the place out in Marina del Rey, where they still are located. They wanted to be out sort of towards the coast because that's where Rand was located. When I arrived, the institute had been there a year. Now, there was no computer science department when I arrived, by the way. The computer science department was not officially formed until '76, when Per Brink Hansen joined. So when I joined, it was a program joint between electrical engineering and mathematics. But the real goal, and I think the real story, at least from my point of view, is just how we went ahead to try and integrate the ISI people with the on-campus people. Because we had somewhat different missions. Our mission on campus, of course, is to do research, but is also to teach. And the researchers at ISI, their mission was primarily research. So there was some differences there that had to be breached, which I think over the years we've accomplished a great deal in terms of integrating the two groups together. That was one of the wonderful things about going to ISI. You actually got contact with the internet. Now that was, that was in the 70s, right? I was connected to the internet in the 70s. I think they dated around '69 as the sort of DARPA start, and ISI was one of the nodes, because Keith was very well connected, and it was Al Kahn, who we knew very well at DARPA, so it wasn't a surprise that ISI was a major node. And those computers up on the penthouse floor was always very funny. We always said those computers had the best view of LA. If you go to ISI and the top floor, you get a gorgeous view, and they had computer rooms up there. In the beginning, it was really, kind of funny. Eventually, I think they moved them out. I think Unkefer really was the guy who raised the money. That is, he took all the projects and went to Washington and basically pitched the entire project. That's the nice thing about ISI is, there was sort of a blanket grant that people fed off of. And so if you were in with Keith, he would tag you on. And I remember chatting with Keith. Keith was so well connected, he actually was on the computer science board at Stanford. Which, and I remember chatting with him, because he was not on, there was no computer science board on campus. And he was pointing out, he says, well, I'm on the computer science board at Stanford, maybe I can help you guys out. I said, well, okay, let us know, give us some ideas, let us know. And eventually Keith became a vice dean, I think under Silverman, probably, when Silverman was dean, before Yortz's. So this is how we eventually sort of incorporated ISI. So we made, Keith and then Herb Shaw were vice deans. Keith had a BA in marketing, which also, on initial blush, looked like, is this the kind of person we want heading a computer science group? I mean, that's right. But nevertheless, it was marketing. He was able to sell the research projects, maybe a skill that he had honed while he was at Rand. So, you need people like that. If you need multi-million-dollar contracts, you need people who are able to go out and sell the ideas. Even if you've got good ideas, they need to be sold. So Keith was just terrific. He was very effective, and he was a great guy to chat with. He's very personable, not surprising. I used to meet him in Washington, because I used to fly to Washington and stay in Reston, and he stayed at a hotel in Reston, and so we would typically bump into each other, in like the executive floor where they have free food. You can come up and get free food now and then. And so we chat about stuff. So he wanted to improve computer science on campus, but of course his main obligation was ISI, so that took precedence. But yeah, Keith was great. There was sort of a hippie culture, actually, in the 70s. There was some crazy guys at ISI. What was it, Billy Bainbridge, or I forget his last name, but he was some sort of huge guy, always walking around with suspenders. I mean, look at Postel. You've seen the pictures of Postel, right? With the long beard. I mean, maybe now it doesn't look that strange, but back then, he was definitely out of sort of a hippie-looking class. Balzer with the dark glasses, I assume, has he been here yet? He's always got the dark glasses on. It was a more free-flowing, they were attracting lots of people who were sort of hanging on and were intellectually very interesting to chat with, and they had a lot of variable interests. Yeah, so in answer to your question, no, I was never employed by ISI. I never got a paycheck from them. But I did go out there, and I did work with some of the research investigators. So an early investigator was Ralph London, and I worked with him. And for a time, I worked with Balzer. And we had some other people who've come and gone, basically, that I was working with. John Guttag was there for a while, and he's at MIT now. So I would go out. I mean, the official policy at the time was you were allowed to go out to ISI. Being at ISI was considered a day on campus, even though you were in the marina. So it's a perfectly gorgeous place, by the way. I'm sure you've seen it. So comparing the two, at the time, well, actually in '73, we didn't even have our current building. Salvatore Computer Science Center was built a couple of years later. So office space was sort of meager on campus, and it was plentiful out at ISI. And ISI had great computers, so they had a lot of good resources, and they had a lot of wonderful researchers. So it was a natural thing to go out and try to develop a joint collaboration. I was more or less passing through. I was primarily focused on the campus and getting our curriculum straight and hiring faculty on campus. The two groups were sort of naturally suspicious. So on the ISI side, there was this, well, we're associated with SC, but SC's downtown, and we're out here, and they just have a computer science program. It's not really highly ranked, and we're doing all the state-of-the-art research. So that was kind of their view of the world. I don't really want to go downtown. We heard that a lot. And then downtown, it was like, well, we're the academics and we're teaching the courses, and, those guys are far away, and so, how can we ever mix, sort of thing. So in the early years, there was sort of, people were sort of eyeing each other and trying to figure out, well, how is this going to work? But the upper administration did have the notion that we want to see if we can integrate the groups effectively. And so that began to happen. So for example, one of the big steps was to appoint some of the researchers at ISI on the faculty. So we have research assistant professors and research associate professors and research professors. And that sort of reassured the campus people that the quality of the people who were getting these titles was warranted. So we do make sure they have the appropriate background in order to get the title. And in return, the people who get these titles are allowed to have Ph.D. students and conduct research, which is, of course, what their main goals are, is to do research. So it's important for them to have Ph.D. students. And so that there was a sort of agreement that both of these things would work cooperatively, so to speak. And then we made, at least I made, a very strong effort, especially while I was chair, to make sure that the ISI faculty would have all of the rights and privileges of faculty, other than this tenure issue. The ISI faculty are not tenured, but beyond that, they should have the same rights and privileges as the on-campus faculty, because after all, they teach courses, so they certainly have opinions about their academics, and they do research and they guide Ph.D. students, and so they do everything else that we do, basically. So we had to go through a period of years sort of battling, let's say, the conservatives who sort of felt had a kind of us versus them attitude. And I hope we've gotten beyond it. At least that was my goal. Because ISI, was hiring wonderful people of a very high quality. So there was no way, in my mind, you could deny them faculty status. If you really go back, I started out in mathematics, as you can imagine, because there was no computer science per se at Brooklyn College where I went undergrad. So what was happening in mathematics at the time was people were spending 6 to 8 years to get a PhD, and then they were going off and they could barely teach calculus. So there was an oversupply of mathematicians. But there was a big demand for this new growing field of computer science. The technology, playing with a machine just never seemed to be, stick out as a particular odd item per se. When I started out, they were all behind glass in air-conditioned rooms that you almost never got into, right? And you interacted with them in punch cards. There was, at Madison, we sat at keyboards and typed punch cards and stuff like this. Usually I don't talk about this because it dates me. But since you've gone back to me in Brooklyn, I guess I can talk about punch cards. But yeah, I guess for me, the real question is, how could I possibly keep up with computer science over a 50-year span? Because look what's happened in those 50 years, okay? When I started out, okay, I joined ACM, the professional society, I believe in '63. There were just large mainframes and punch card machines. And there was Fortran, and assembly code. And so my career, the arc of my career, has all been consumed with keeping up with the technological changes as they've moved from time to time. And it's kind of, and I'm facing it right now because, students expect to get the latest and greatest. And there's no abatement in how fast computer science is changing. Now we have cloud computing. Whoever had that? we just had mainframes, and then we went to personal computers, and then workstations, and so there's been all these transitions year after year, and that's why being a professor is a wonderful career, because it's really given me the opportunity to keep up with all of these changes, learn about them, and hopefully contribute in some way.